I am coming to really love the Karen Reed trial. There are so many things that I can teach about in this trial. Today, we're going to talk about how Jennifer McCabe was coached to answer the questions that are put to her. Hi, Tony DeWitt here. I'm a Missouri appellate attorney, retired, and I bring you a fresh perspective on the law without offering any legal advice. So pull up a chair. This is what we're discussing today. As you might guess, I have conducted numerous witness examinations as an attorney. I've done them in depositions and I've done them in trials. In depositions, there's really nobody to play to, but in trials, there's always the jury to play to. But here's the thing, if you take your average witness off the street, the guy who saw the car wreck, and you ask him a simple question like, what color was the light that you saw? He will look you in the eye and say, it was red, or it was green, or it was yellow. What he won't do is throw up his hands, turn to the jury, and say, well, there I was. I was just getting ready to dance across the street. And I heard this terrible sound coming. It sounded like a motorboat, and it was a race car. And of course, at that point, he's going to get interrupted because his answer is non responsive. The question was, did you see what color the light was? But a normal witness who hasn't been coached will answer what color the light was. No drama, no extended hand gestures, no attempt to pose and look self important. On the other hand, when you have a doctor whose negligence caused or contributed to cause the death of someone else and who's on trial for medical negligence, what the doctor will do when asked, for example, how long it took him to get to the hospital, is turn to the jury and put on his frowny face and say, I loved Nancy. She was just the sweetest patient, and the idea that she might be laying there in the ICU having trouble breathing, oh my, well, it just distressed me so much. He won't overdo the drama. He'll overdo the empathy. They always overdo something. I overdid the drama because it's fun, because I kind of enjoy making fun of people who do bad things in court. And I think lying in court is a very bad thing. If you are watching closely in that medical negligence trial, you would see his blink rate increase when you ask him about the standard of care. Did you drop the scalpel on the floor and pick it up and put it back in the chest? Well, no, nobody would, nobody would do that. Of course not. No, 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 no. Their blink rate goes up. It's an indication of stress, but in many cases, it's also an indication of lying. And so it's a pretty good clue because he will all the medical negligence guy is always going to deny that he deviated from the standard of care, even when every textbook written on the subject says that he did. He'll have some excuse. The sun was in his eyes. He didn't know the gun was loaded. It wasn't my dog. It didn't bite you. That's how witnesses are coached to answer questions. They're coached to answer the question they want to answer, not the question you ask them. You see this again and again in the cross examination of Jennifer McCabe. She can't answer a simple yes or no question with a yes or a no. Normally, in a trial with a good judge who understands the rules of evidence and who understands how to conduct a fair trial, when witnesses start evading questions, you can ask the judge to instruct them to answer the question. And that's important because what the judge will say is, it's a yes or no question, Ms. McCabe. Answer yes or no, and then you can explain. That's the way you handle this. You get them to answer it, and then they get to trot out their lies. They don't get to trot out their lies 3 or 4 times before they get to be told answer it only yes or no. But in this case, the judge simply says, can you answer that question? And when the witness says no, she lets them off the hook. The job of the judge is to get answers to questions when witnesses do not want to give them. But apparently in this case, she's unwilling to do that for some reason. Everybody who's in the chat sees it, and hopefully the jury sees it too. As you watch these clips that follow, notice her mannerisms. Notice how she cocks her head and turns to the jury and and throws her hands up and says, "Well, there were no stories. I was just telling the truth. We were just talking about the truth." Normal witnesses don't do that. Only witnesses that are coached will do that. Or I would guess some witnesses who might have had theater training or communications training might do that, but that's a pretty small subset. Since McCabe refers to herself as just a simple mom, you wouldn't expect that she has had this training. But she has been expertly coached on how to answer these questions, just like Carrie Roberts was expertly coached on how to answer these questions. That does not happen by accident. Somebody's gilding the lily. Most likely, the coaching has come from her husband and other police officers who've told her not to answer the question that was asked, but to answer the one she wants to answer. Let's take a look at this clip and you'll see what I mean.
Courtney Proctor is friends with Julie's sister.
Yes.
And obviously Courtney also knows Julie and Chris, correct?
Sustained.
And there's also a connection to Canton Police Department through Kevin Albert. Is that right?
Exactly.
Can you answer that? Is there a connection? Do you have a connection with the Canton Police Department through Kevin Albert?
Not with the police department, but Kevin Albert is Brian Albert's brother.
Right. And Kevin works for whom?
The Canton Police.
Thank you. So you've been interviewed many times by different law enforcement agencies, be they Massachusetts State Police, Canton Police, or otherwise, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Those interviews have not just been over the period of weeks, it's been over the period of weeks and months and even years since this occurred, correct?
Yes.
You were contacted by another law enforcement agency that was not Massachusetts State Police and not Canton Police Department at one point in April of 2023. Do you remember that?
Yes.
It's worth noting that the judge, and particularly the prosecution, don't want to reveal the fact that the feds had investigated the prosecution and the DA's office, as well as a number of other people involved in this case. They closed it without bringing charges, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is innocent. It just means there's probably not enough evidence to convict anyone, and federal prosecutors don't usually bring claims unless there's a 95% chance or better of getting a conviction.
I want to talk for a second about that series of interview, or that interview. You were contacted at your residence by these members of this law enforcement agency, correct?
Yes.
All right. Later that same day, you did sit down with those same law enforcement officers for a formal interview.
On that,
same day that you were contacted by them, they also went into your home and actually interviewed you, correct?
yes, it was brief.
All right. Those law enforcement officers identified themselves as being associated with an agency that is not Massachusetts State Police. You understood that.
Yes.
And you understood that they were not involved with Canton Police Department either, correct?
Correct.
Completely separate agency, is that right?
Yes.
During the course of that interview, those officers informed you very specifically, Ms. McCabe, that it is a crime to lie to them, even during an interview, correct?
Yes.
Those law enforcement officers informed you that they were investigating certain circumstances attendant to John O'Keefe's death, correct?
They were very vague on what they were.
Understood.
I don't know what they were investigating.
But you did understand that it was having something to do with your involvement at 34 Fairview on January 28th, 29th, 2022.
Objection.
As a witness or otherwise?
Objection.
Sustained as to certain terminologies.
Sure. Let me see if I can rephrase that, Ms. McCabe. You were aware of the subject matter of their interview, right? They weren't interviewing about a car you bought last year, correct?
Correct.
They were interviewing you basically about what you're testifying to here, correct?
When I first spoke with them, the conversation was pretty vague.
But the subject matter, vague or specific, was about this subject matter.
Yes.
Okay, fair enough. And you told them that you had called Carrie Roberts before they interviewed you, correct? At that moment.
I'm not 100% sure, but if you have it, I'll... It seems like something I would do, but if you have it, could show me.
Absolutely.
Did you notice there at the end where she says, if you have it, I'd like to look at it? She kept closing her eyes when she would finish answering the question. It has been my experience that when people close their eyes when they're answering questions, where they just take a moment and close their eyes and say what they need to say, that quite often that doesn't track with what I understand to be the truth. Now, again, I'm not saying that McCabe is lying. I'm saying the behaviors she's evidencing are indicative of lying in some people. So, again, you be the judge. And speaking of that, one of the things that people often do when they know that someone else has written something down, they will ask to see what the other person wrote down, oftentimes so that they can conform their testimony to something close to what's written by the other party. Uh, they do that a lot when there are conflicts in the testimony and they want to track closer to one side than the other. Again, not saying that's what's happening here. She may just be curious as to what this person wrote down, but the bottom line, of course, is that these again are indicators and hallmarks of someone not being completely honest in their answers. In this next segment, he busts her for calling Carrie Roberts. And at the end of it, she gives an explanation for why she called Carrie Roberts. And I'd love to know in the comments whether you buy this particular explanation or whether you think it's contrived. I'm just asking because I think that's a really important thing. Now, the next thing I want to say is you'll notice that she's denying this and he just keeps on asking. And there are objections and he keeps on asking because it isn't the answers that matter. It's her reaction to the questions and what she says, and it's the questions. But mostly it's the questions because the jury wants to know the answer to these too. And the jury is probably thinking the same thing that Jackson is thinking when he asks some of these questions.
First, I'm going to ask you, Ms. McCabe, if you recognize that as being a report of that interview, just generally, yes or no?
It appears to be, yes.
May I approach the witness stand and stand by the witness stand for a couple of questions?
Yes.
Thank you. If I can have that.
Sure.
I want to direct your attention, if I may, and for court and counsel, page 3 of 4, starting with the second to the last full paragraph, going into page 5, top full. Page 4, top full paragraph.
Okay.
If you could review those two paragraphs, read them to yourself, and then look up and let me know when you're finished. Did reviewing those paragraphs refresh your recollection as to what you told those agents initially? What you told those officers initially from that other law enforcement agency, about who you contacted in that 10-minute interval?
Yes, I told them.
And you told them that you had contacted your husband, Matt McCabe,
Yes,
and Carrie Roberts.
correct.
I want to stick with that for just a quick second. One of the first calls you made after being contacted by these other law enforcement officers from a different agency, one of the first calls you made was to Carrie Roberts. Is that right?
She was the first one.
That's what I'm asking. One of the first two calls you made, your husband,
Right.
come home, there's law enforcement outside my door, I'm guessing is what you said, correct?
I don't remember my exact words now, but I did ask him to come home, correct?
And
Yes.
Carrie Roberts.
Okay, yes,
You wanted to let Ms. Roberts know that you had been contacted by certain officers from a different agency, correct?
I was curious if they had already been to her.
That
Because-
was my next question.
yeah.
You also wanted to find out had these law enforcement officers from this different agency contacted her, correct?
Yes, because typically, if
I
you
just
enter
asked
our
yes or no.
town, she's.
Ms. McCabe, yes or no?
Oh, sorry, I was just trying to
That's okay.
explain. I'm sorry.
Is that why you contacted her, to find out if in fact they had contacted her before you? Yes or no?
Yes,
You wanted to find out if she had talked to these particular law enforcement officers and what she had told them so that your story could somehow align or it could inform how you responded to questions that they asked you. Isn't that true?
that's not true. We both know what happened. We don't have to have a story. There is no story. There's what happened, and that's it.
So if that's true, Ms. McCabe, you'd have no reason to call Carrie and ask her if she had been contacted by these law enforcement agents, because it's just the truth, correct?
We're going through this whole experience together. We call each other about everything.
There would
That's
be no
nothing
reason,
more than that. I'm sorry.
Let her finish her.
There is so much more in this cross examination that I wish that YouTube had time for me to get into. There are lots of different things that we could look at. The way he cross examines her, it really brings out some of her less favorable qualities. She's she seems to be very nervous on the stand, and she does a lot of the behaviors, like I said, with the increased blink rate, as well as sort of the theatrics that I would hope that a jury would look at and think, that doesn't seem really like she's telling me the truth. It seems like she wants me to believe, that there's no stories. Well, clearly everybody has a story in this, and that doesn't necessarily imply a lie. What it implies is that everybody is telling their version of what they saw. But when you talk about not having a story, it's sort of it's sort of an admission in and of itself, because clearly she does have a story to tell. At any rate, again, I'm not suggesting in any way that she's lying. I'm saying that she's displaying some behaviors that indicate mendacity, but not necessarily, everybody has different ways of handling stress, and she may just be very stressed out for some other reason. Maybe she burned toast for breakfast this morning. Who knows? But this was a very good, very well done cross examination, and you can see a lot of the techniques that I've talked about on the channel in use here. The only thing I don't think he's doing enough of is leading questions, because if he had used some more tight leading questions, he might have been able to confine her answers a little bit better. But he's never going to be able to confine this witness's answers completely, because one, the judge is giving her way too much protection, and two, she's just been coached to death to be able to tell her version of this story. And you can take from that what you will. That's what I have for you today. I hope you found it helpful, interesting, or maybe both. If there's a subject you'd like me to discuss, please feel free to send me an email at the address above. If you like what we do, please feel free to subscribe and come on back to the beach tomorrow. I release videos every weekday, weather and work permitting. If you have the opportunity today, do a kindness for your fellow man. It makes the world a better place, one kind act at a time. And now, YouTube has some suggestions for other videos of mine that you might like.